The biggest thing most musicians struggle with when starting to play jazz or even gospel and fusion music is how many chords there are to deal with, particularly 2-5-1s and all of the different scales that can go over a dominant chord. And over the years, a lot of great musicians and educators have passed down some sage advice on how to simplify the process of dealing with these changes. A lot of the time this involves chunking or thinking of just one chord instead of another. There's the Barry Harris, Joe Pass school of just thinking about the 5 chord over 2 5s. Or jazz guitarist Pat Martino's concept of just playing the 2 chord over the 2 5. There's hundreds of great books and videos about this on YouTube, and I, like most musicians I know, use both of those concepts all the time, depending on the musical context. But today I want to show you a different approach based on linear harmony that I found to be extremely cello-friendly, particularly for those of you who've been taking the classes at the improvisorsguide.com, and that I haven't seen discussed on YouTube before. Although I'm sure it's on YouTube somewhere. I mean, everything's on YouTube, right? Most of us start our improvisation journey with the blues, and I think the most liberating aspect of that for improvising students is that we can really focus on one key center the whole time. And while there are chord changes, we usually handle those by turning our major or Mixolydian sound into a Dorian or minor sound. So for example, if we're playing a C blues, we're often playing our C major pentatonic and then just making that a C minor or C Dorian sound over the 4 chord. Our brain can stay comfortably in the key of C in this case and simply move 1 or 2 notes around to change it from major to minor. And with time and enough listening, even beginners can do this at the right time in the chord changes and achieve our goal as improvisers, which is the freedom of being able to play all the right notes without thinking. But when we get to the next level of blues or jazz chord progressions and start to deal with major and especially minor 2-5-1s, we start to develop, and a lot of us are taught, a much more complicated process. Thinking about a different scale or even mode of a different scale for each chord in the progression. And even as we improve and speed up our ability to hear and think about all of those scales that are whizzing by, it still makes the process of voice leading and landing on the next chord scale in a musical way really complex, and it can make improvising over these changes feel more like a math equation and less like playing music. But what if we can approach our 2-5-1 progressions, even the dreaded minor 2-5-1 with all of the different alterations on the 5 chord and scale choices that could imply, with the same clear, simple approach that we use to play the blues? Well, that's exactly what we're going to be working on today. So today I want to show you a few exercises for taking the entire 2-5-1 progression, major and especially minor. And just like we did in the blues, we're going to be focusing on just the tonic the entire time. Now, even if you've been practicing your 2-5-1s for the last 20 years and you feel incredibly comfortable with any of the strategies I mentioned before, or even your own strategies for tackling these progressions, I would argue that going through these exercises and spending a little bit of time in this headspace is well worth the effort. Number one, it's going to eliminate a lot of clutter in your brain. Thinking just one over an entire 2-5-1 progression is obviously going to allow you to think less, which means you're going to be able to tackle faster tunes like all those bebop classics we all play with a lot less anxiety. Number two, it's going to encourage you to hear forward. Jazz pianist and educator Hal Galper talks about this in terms of forward motion, where we're able to listen and hear through the 2-5 all the way to the final resolution point of the 1 chord. Thirdly, this type of thinking really helps lay the groundwork for more modern types of jazz improvisation, particularly modal styles. As when we play modal music, we're usually improvising over a static chord and implying more complex harmony, usually 2-5-1s, over the top of that. Let's start with a simple 2-5-1 lick in first position, key of F major. Again. I'll get Moses to transcribe this, and the worksheet will be available for you on the Improvisors Guide or link below. So we could think about these chord tones in terms of over the 2 chord, over the 5 chord, but again, we just want to focus on thinking of all of this as, at this moment, F major, okay? So I'm starting on the 7th, and ending on the tonic, right? And until I end on that tonic, I'm emphasizing, you notice, mostly not FAC, not the notes of the tonic triad, because that would sound kind of resolved. Instead, I'm focusing on the notes in between those, right? Starting on the 2nd scale degree and emphasizing the 2nd, the 4th, the 6th, kind of those notes in the cracks. And of course, those are the notes of the 2-5 chords, but don't worry about that for now. Just focus on thinking of everything in terms of F major. So what we're going to do is we're going to play the F major scale really quick, just to remind us kind of what our hand shapes are and where we are. Let's just go just the range that the lick is in. We don't need to practice our scale all over the instrument for now. And then we're going to play our little lick. Now let's lower 1 note and make this an F Mixolydian scale. Go down 1 step in the cycle of fifths and resolve right back up to where we started, just like we do in the blues. So starting with the scale, it's going to sound like this. And now we'll change the lick with that new altered note. So it's going to sound like this. So with a background track, you might practice it this way. And then, by the way, in case your theory brain is buzzing, you actually just implied a dominant 7 sharp 9. But try to turn off your theory brain for now and just try to enjoy the sound of the tension of that note resolving. You can also work on hearing these tensions by changing the resolution note, resolving whatever scale degree you just lowered back to its original note, like this. Right? Right? Very cool. Now let's continue on our cycle of fifths going down or fourths going up by adding the lowered third. This is going to give us our Dorian mode. So now we have lowered 7th like before, but adding the lowered third. Let's hear it as a scale first. Again. Right, so now I have E flat and A flat, right, along with the B flat that's in our key signature. Let's try that with the track. And because that doesn't contain the flat third, the lick I just randomly chose, let's alter it slightly to include it, like this. And now I can really hear that flat third, also known as the flat 13, if you're thinking of the 5 chord, but don't. You might want to resolve that up to A natural. Right? Or down to G, right? The 9th. Okay. Very, very cool. Now let's continue on the cycle by adding our lowered 6th or our flatted 13, right? This is our F natural or minor or Aeolian scale. And let's try the scale first. So we're going to have D flat now. Okay, and Let's try that sound with our lick. Again. We're getting into one of the most common sounds in minor 2-5-1s, because that D flat, obviously over a dominant 7th chord, is implying a flat 9 type sound. But the great part is that if you learn this as a tension, you don't have to necessarily be thinking in the moment about all of those alterations. It can be a sound that you hear and that you feel in your hand while you stay in F. And I should also say that a really good exercise at this point, now that we've added 3 possible sort of alterations to our major scale sound, which again you can resolve right back to the major scale when you get to the tonic, you can mix and match these, right? You don't necessarily, once you get the sound of each one of these tensions, and you can feel and hear how they resolve, you can start to mix them up, right? Like a very common thing you could do would be to, let's keep the E natural. Let's see here. And leave all the other notes of our Aeolian scale. And each one of these really have their own kind of flavor and sound and feel, right? Which is the advantage to just working on one at a time and just adding one at a time. Let's hear how that sounds applied to our lick with the background track. So again, E natural. Super common jazz sound, right? And again, what you actually just did is you just implied the 4th mode of C harmonic minor, which is one of the most common choices that especially old school jazz guys would play over the 5 chord. But again, I want you to compare the process, right? Because obviously the result sounds the same. But if you were on a gig, right, and you wanted to, say, use that sound, a lot of the time, you know, you would see, say, a 2-5-1 in F, like what we're doing here, major or minor, and you'd see that C7, and all of a sudden you'd think, okay, that's a C7 chord. I could use the 4th mode. So let me see, from C, let me go up 4 scale degrees. Okay, now I'm on an F. Now I need, what's the key signature for F? Melodic or harmonic minor. That's the raised 7th and the lowered 6th. Okay, I've got it. What fingering? By that time, the gig is probably over, right? Because you have so many steps and so many different kind of equations or processes that your brain needs to crunch just to get to that sound. Some of you may say, well, no, you just have to get faster at thinking about it. I think a better strategy in general, whenever I'm told something like that, is to figure out how I can think less, right? In other words, if you need to think about more than just, oh, I'm just in the key of F, right? I think it's too much, right? And this way, essentially, when I'd be improvising, say I'm in F major or whatever, when I get to that, you know, a 2-5-1, I'm staying in F the whole time in this case, right? And so any of those alterations, it's very easy for me to feel how they resolve back to good old F, okay? And that is one of the advantages of thinking and hearing using a system like this. Let's go down one more in the cycle, and now we are going to lower our 2nd scale degree, right? So this is going to be the good old Phrygian mode, okay? Let's have a listen to it. Just the scale. Okay, again, I'm still in F, right? But I'm just going below it to cover the range of the lick. Don't be confused as I go down to the 7th E flat and now the 6th D flat, okay? Cool, let's hear that with our lick. pretty interesting. Now we're getting into the world of almost like an altered sound. And again, there's so much tension on our dominant seventh chords, even if the rhythm section hasn't added any tensions, that all of these sounds are valid and cool. Just hear the sound of it. Right? Or you could also try resolving that a half step the opposite direction. Again, anything in F major, right? Great sound. Right? And just hearing the sound, body, right? Or ba-da is so valuable, right? That's really getting the harmony of the line, the linear harmony of it in your brain, and that is a much more effective way to think as a melody player. I'm not saying understanding any of this in any other way is bad or not helpful, but in the moment, I think a lot of you guys will get a lot of utility out of approaching things from this perspective. Another huge advantage of going down the cycle like this is that most jazz standards have chord progressions where we do exactly this, right? So getting this under your fingers is just something that all jazz musicians need to do, whether you're using this system or not. And for those of you that are IGC acolytes, you guys are experts in instantly generating all of the fingerings for any of these modes in any scale in any position. So this really brings that work into a whole new light. And speaking of altered, if you wanted to now alter the root note by taking it down a half step, just for a minute, right, before you resolve it up, you would get this scale. Which is also known as the altered scale. Just to make sure you got it, let's run through this routine together and we'll try a different lick. So basically a scale starting from the third, A, right? And then at the end, we're just doing a little enclosure. Jumping over the A and then resolving on it. Let's try this whole thing one more time with the background track. Cool, now let's lower the seventh, giving us a Mixolydian sound, or for you IGC people, just sliding down the grid one string. Very cool. Now let's make it a Mixolydian sound, lowering our third and seventh, like this. A 1, 2, ready, and trying to really enjoy the sound of each one of those new tensions as we play it. You can linger a lot longer than we're doing right now if you like. Now let's lower our sixth scale degree, giving us natural minor or Aeolian sound. A 1, 2, ready, and of course, if you want to just raise the leading tone of your F Aeolian scale, you can get that other fourth mode of harmonic minor sound. Ready? And very cool. Now let's lower our second scale degree, going to Phrygian, getting into altered territory here. Okay. And if you want to, you can lower the root, getting us into full altered scale territory like this. The last thing I want to share with you guys that I think is critical for cementing any routine you're working on is to finish by combining whatever you're practicing with other standard pieces of jazz language that we should all be working on all the time if we're interested in jazz. Like, for example, adding some auxiliary tones, right? That's such a huge part of jazz language, any style. We should always be working on that, right? So going back to the original lick, right? Try adding 1 one note below, or chromatic maybe above and below. Huge part of just developing kind of jazz technique on our instrument, right? Right, etc., etc. You should also be maybe throwing in some arpeggio shapes that we should all be working on all the time, right? Like this. Right? Etc., etc., right? Whatever you're doing, that's a great chance. And I also am always working on ending cliches, you know, the little phrase toppers or topping on the Sunday that jazz musicians usually use to, you know, complete their ideas, or commonly use, I should say. Like, what about jumping up or down a sixth? Right? Or down? Right? That's a really common one. Or maybe ending with two chromatic notes, right? Like this. Very common one. Or ending with an auxiliary tone. That's a really common one. Right? So all of those are really, really good ways, again, to instantly create some new lines, maybe get some new inspiration, but to put this in the context of the language of jazz and the other concepts that you're practicing, right? That's such a huge part of, again, cementing the work that you're doing. So go through this, have fun with it, and I hope, again, even if you've been working on 2-5-1s your whole life, and feel super comfortable with whatever strategies you've been using, that this type of work can be helpful to you in just putting some of the ideas or some of the sounds that you've been working with and maybe use already in a slightly different light, in a different context. Perspective is everything, and we can never have too much perspective on these bedrock concepts of our great American music. So hope you enjoyed that. If you did, and you're watching this on YouTube, click like and subscribe, and I will see you next time.